We are going to take a few questions. Maybe Gingeras, Xurxer, and Munjan could join us, even though it's a bit awkward. So, question, yes? Yeah.
Can you repeat the question? She's asking this.
It's not very easy. It's between, okay? It's here. And it was completely black. It means that everybody was killed there.
Yeah, so she's asking a question about Nida, the district of Nida, that was completely black and everybody killed there. I should have said that this is especially a map of the eastern part of the country. There's also a map for the western part of the country. If you want, I can send that to you. But it looks a bit different there, actually. The levels are a bit lower there.
There's no special reason.
I haven't studied it.
Yes?
I'd like to know what happened in general to the Indian property. I probably should know, but I understand that my, for instance, grandmother could have had property back in Istanbul, Constantinople. Was there a registry or how would
What happened to Armenian property? I think you have the right person in front of you, Rumit, if you want to say what happened. It's in good hands, don't worry. Say.
I hope I'll ask Stefan to say the question. Armenian property.
Oh,
So I mean, this is really a really big question about. There are a couple of studies about it. What happened to the Armenian property? I think is too general as a question to ask. It was taken over by the state, or it was given to private persons. Within the state, it was distributed according to different, and within private individuals, to those who received property, like the families that we showed, for example, they simply sat on it and they used it as a capital as well. Kind of expand and broaden their businesses and their property. I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of what happened. Archives were the Kapı Kadastro archives, but already Yekta is very restricted, very difficult to get access to. Partly, I think, also for privacy reasons. But in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul, in the Başbakan, you can find a lot of documents. In our book, we use quite a few of those as well.
I may add one comment. When we are speaking about property, we have to distinguish between mobile and immobile property. That's also another question. It's not only the property that is fixed. There are other properties. Well,
yes, sir.
I'd like to make a comment. The
Yes.
comment is there's a war going on in Europe between the British, the Germans, basically the French. You have to fuel a war. So fuel is a major issue. The fuel at the time is coming from mostly from South America. The British are down there, got Farallon Islands, keeping the Germans from getting to it. So the Germans they have a better source of fuel than Venezuela and Argentina. So they have some Germans.
Okay,
But
what's the
they're
question? Tell us what's the question.
No, I'm making
No.
a comment.
Okay.
It's not a question. Is that all right?
It's fine if it's
I
short.
want their opinion instead of my opinion. This is my opinion. In possible fuel in the Middle East. So he wrote his book, there, so that he had developed it. In touch with the sheiks, and he had control over the oil, basically. If you could get to it, you need to deal with Gulbenkian. The other obstacle we learned in the way were the Kurds. The Kurds have got a military. They did have soldiers in the Caucasus. And anyway, they came down and they could only stay 2 years. But that's another story. I don't think the Armenians had really an army to contend with them. So the Turks were not a problem. But the Germans were there. And the Germans wanted to get the rail to the Middle East. And that's what their goal was. Now the Armenians are there. Gulbenkian's got it, they need to get railroad made. 100,000 Armenians, from what I've read, were building that railroad and got killed. Germans got very upset. Germans had a very major role in it, and Hitler knew that. And he saw what happened. These
Okay.
different villages.
So, a final point, what is it that you wish to say about the railway, the oil, and so on? What's the point with in relation to the genocide?
The genocide? Pardon? Can you tie it into the genocide? Yes, I can. Please.
Okay.
Tie it into the genocide.
Let's go there.
It's just a
Great.
theory. I'm not doing anything. But the Germans, Gulbenkian had it. Gulbenkian's an Armenian. The Armenians, he says to Gulbenkian, you give us priority over that oil, but we get rid of your people.
Who said that to Gulbenkian? We get rid of your people?
Germans.
The Germans.
The Germans. The Germans are there in Turkey. And the Kurds were down there. We saw that they killed the Kurds.
Okay. Okay, I got the point. I think that point needs.
There's no direct relation. There is no direct. In the most closest things to it would have been very closing stages in the war in which the Ottomans intervened directly into Caucasian affairs. And the question of oil is, in essence, it's not an actual one. This is not the equivalent of Hitler trying to grab the Caucasus in the Second World War. And even at that was a little bit, kind of ephemeral. More to the point is that oil did not drive this. And even Ottoman intervention into the Caucasus was limitedly, very limitedly material issues. So that's the short answer.
Okay. Yes, sir, and then.
Or Dr. Zurha. Unless I misunderstood you, I think you said in 1904 in the agreement in Mürsteg, and then 10 years later in the Eastern Anatolia, you said the purpose was to keep the integrity, protect the integrity of the Ottoman Empire. But when we look at the foreign policy of the Russians and the Austrians in the last 2-3 centuries, don't you think that the Ottoman leadership have a lot of reasons to be suspicious?
They had, but the thing is that in both cases, what's uppermost in the minds of the European policymakers, Russian and begin with, and then the others joined that. And in 1914, of course, the Russians taking the initiative, but then all the others joining in. What's uppermost in their minds is the danger of European conflict between the great powers. So that they're not particularly concerned with the fate of people in Macedonia or Armenia. It is the threat that this could cause a major European war that what concerns them. Of course, they were right. Ultimately, that is what happened after the Mogun Sarajevo. So it wasn't that outlandish thought. The idea is that reforms, that reforms are an alternative to the parceling out, the division of the empire, and two, that you cannot trust the Ottomans to actually execute the reforms they commit to, because that is what happens in Macedonia. The original reform plan proposed by the Ottomans is adopted but not executed. So Mürsteg is about execution as much as it is about actually planning the reform. So yes, of course, they have a lot of reasons to be suspicious. Certainly, Austria and Russia have been, in this land grab for centuries. But at that particular moment, after 1897, in the Balkans, big powers didn't want division, didn't want parceling out, didn't want collapse of the empire, and they saw reform as a way to prevent that.
Okay.
I thought there was great discussion about the Kurdish role, especially Russian role, which I think goes usually silent, because if we wanted to posit the fact that the Russians wanted Armenia, what we call Western Armenia, then, Armenia without Armenians, and we say, well, what methods did they have to establish this? Could it be seen that that's what they got? I mean, at the end of the day, what they could have gotten had they not had a revolution and destroyed themselves into a different world set would have been an Armenia without Armenians, but killed by Kurds and Turks. So then this makes it not controversial that Turks and Armenians got along, and there was allegiance, and that the Turks trusted the Armenians, but that maybe what was fueling this whole thing about getting rid of the Armenians from was actually Russian. Is there any possible credibility to that, and Armenian, and seeing how this is going to play out, whether the Kurds would get the Armenians would get the Turks would get them both, and then the rest is brush fire. It wasn't planned, but it was executed as best it could be, sort of like the path of least resistance. What do you think of that model?
I think, okay, they got, that Armenia without Armenians is the old Russian plan, but then at the end, if you look at what it ended up with, yes, Armenia without Armenians and Russians. Because, the Ottoman Empire lost territory, but they won territories in, so they, you have losers in the war, but still, they expand their territory. Yeah, empire, regarding empire rivalry, first of all, I think, the field of Armenian genocide studies needs to get rid of this dialogue with denialism. So once we do that, then new pages start opening up. We have not yet come to because we are still looking up the perpetrators. I think it's so simple. We don't need. There should be an economy of curiosity. We can't spend our entire life trying to convince some weird minds about who killed them. And that's among other things brutal. To ask people to prove their own death, their ancestors' death, is among other things cruel. Once we put that aside, I think really interesting pictures and new fresh space, and then let's start talking about responsibility. We know perpetrators. Russian responsibility, definitely. That's all. After that, we should also start about some responsibilities, right? We need to look at which organizations took what steps in those crucial reasons. And we should also keep in mind that oftentimes when we talk about these issues, we say Armenians did that, but indeed that is done by a group. And those groups do not necessarily move with interests. They have their own organizational interests. And in this case, the collective actors, you see that they don't really very often move with ideological motives. So that's another thing. Also, talk about responsibility of let's talk about British responsibility, French responsibility. They did not want to lose a couple of French troops. That's how Antep become Gaziantep, Marash become victimized once again. And let's talk about British responsibility. What happened to those people put on trial? So I'm not. I can respond to that question later. After we can talk about this thing. But I think about your questions. Really, the issue of responsibility is much broader than the issue of perpetratorship. I think it's other.
Peggy, you wanted to say something?
First, thank you all for this really I saw all of you. My question is for Nick Tom, however. I found shocking his information about the leaders, at least three of the leaders of the Armenian political groups during the Holocaust, which was gradual, etc. This was and not only did this is what sort of shocks me, that they were so out of it, that they were optimistic, but that you seem to think they were in the know and they had reason to be optimistic. I'm staggered by that, but you're very convincing. So my question is, what explanation happened in 1950 for the genocide, if you think it was really not just unpredictable by them up to the last months, but really unpredictable by anyone.
I mean, first of all, I was say that, oh, they were right. You know, apparently they were wrong. We know what happened. I can't trying to myself because I mean the same is with reform debates. I mean, of course. I mean, if you look at reform debates 2050, you say that of course they were irritated. But you need to look at reform debates from let's say November of 1930. The reform debate meant something to the CUP leaders. It meant something else on the 8th of February, and it meant something totally different when the war started. I mean, on the February 8th, they were happy about what they got out of it, right? And as when the war started, they were more concerned with what they lost there. Okay, regarding the Armenians, I'm the same thing. I'm just doing Armenian. I mean, I'm an anthropologist. I'm not a historian. I'm more interested in what people were thinking rather than what was that linear line was like. So if you look from that perspective, I mean, look. I mean, I'm a historian, let's say in the year 2015, I'm saying that almost collapsing around. Instead of calling them naive, I have to understand what they thought at them. Regarding my explanation, I'm still working on it. Another thing that is as explosive a question as the escalation process, because first of all, I'm still writing on it, but so I mean, it's quite a challenging process. So far, I've been more interested in the debates within the Armenian community. But let me put it this way: all actors involved conflict totally contradicted their positions only months ago.
Because you raised it.
I don't want to come to the rescue of my colleague, but maybe perhaps he and me are stuck in the minutiae of the issue that we can feel what we are saying, but it's still very hard to explain because, as Ram said in the morning, there is a paradigm historically existing, and what we are trying to do is come up with a new paradigm that would the situation. To my knowledge, for example, the first time that Talat explored the possibility of having Armenians deported from the war zone was after the Sarikamish defeat. Before that, you don't even have any corresponding against Armenians. Should Armenians rebel in Van, for example? Okay, so this is what he was calling the rapidity or the momentarily explosion of the situation at the time. And down to what we have until now is a linear geography, is a linear paradigm, while in reality it's more complex and we have to follow up with it.
But let me follow the order, if you don't mind. Eric, and then we because that's how it proceeded,
Yeah, at the risk of sounding negative, but I think what you're saying may be right. But
Be louder, Eric.
sorry,
Can you use the microphone?
I happily it's not here. Yeah. Okay. So more force. What I think is that this hopeful period, you may very well be right for the Armenian side. I judge that. I very much whether you're right in that sense. The evidence self-presented Ömer Nagi's statement. Ömer Nagi, remember, is a core member of the CUP who had been involved even in the small circle that committed the coup d'etat of January 1913, close friend of Mustafa Kemal. I think we should take that a little bit more seriously, what he's saying there. And as to the linear aspect, well, I would say that we shouldn't overlook the the expulsion of the Greek Orthodox from West Asia Minor, which happens in May, sort of benign period of mutual understanding between Armenians and young Turks. It's the young Turks embark on a policy of ethnic homogenization of Western Anatolia. So, you know, in spite of everything, I like not totally jettison the idea of linear development here.
If you wish.
Yeah, no, just, okay, first of all, let me quote Ömer Naci from, first of all, I did not talk much about the CUP. I can do that. Probably, I mean, their optimism would not be as the optimism of Armenians. Among other things, Armenians were more about, I mean, they got, I mean, the Armenians, they thought something, they got something. They got the reference, you know, but, I mean, okay. I mean, the problem with the COP is that, I mean, they were not like making decisions under the most, you know, suitable conditions after Balkan Wars. So they are trying to like basically trying to like limited sources, trying to like make this entity work. And the same in November 1913 had an interview with Afka where he expressed support and belief to the Taşnakçı and intentions of the Armenians and his support for the Armenian reform. What you can do is like, you can say that like, was that his real, I mean, is that what, but we can never ever, I mean, the thing is like, there is you see that like, he felt obliged to, I mean, or he thought like, he should say it, right? And like, by the way, this support, like, he did not only, and I can just find the quote and read it, but and regarding the, I mean, the rebellion team, I mean, that's like, another question. I mean, so differences. One big question is still there. I mean, why there wasn't more resistance? I mean, that is a beautiful question. If those rebellions were not there. One is the hub of Taşnakçı. The resistance in one was organized by a Ramgavur, a liberal Armenian. And like, like we think about like another major center, Şerin Karahisar, and Musala. Those are not the areas where, I mean, the most prominent, organization was influential.
Ümit want to say something?
Very brief follow-up on what Gökhan said. When members of the CUP, leaders or slightly lower ranking people, when they write in newspapers, national newspapers, we support the reform plan, we believe in coexistence with Armenians, is that really what they think? That's the first question. Number two, how can we find out what they really think? Well, we have some pretty decent source criticism by some of our colleagues, Haniolu, for example, but there are others who have looked at some of the internal discussions. And some of this is hearsay and rumor, etc., but it's basically all we have to work with. Then, based on a reading of those, position would be the perpetrators, in this case of the regime, really, really very good at discipline. Not just on the international level in Istanbul, but for example in Kayseri, the day before they deport them, they hang these banners on the doors of the churches and mosques, etc. And these banners, they say, here are a couple of regulations what you should do with your property. Register everything in the name of a relative who's outside of the country. Make sure that you don't bring anything. Only keep that much money, etc., etc., etc. And when you go to Deir Zor, you get everything back. And then you look at the internal, the secret, the Dahiliye Shifre materials, and they're absolutely ruthless in the way they've already decided last week already to in the frontal destruction. So I think it's important to look at the escalation process. I'm a bit more nefarious in my thoughts about the CP.
I happen to share your view of the Young Turk leaders and their approach to Armenians overall, you know. But we'll take a final question. Novik,
So everybody is here sure that the Armenian genocide is a lot disaster for the Armenians and the Turks. What would be the long-term or short-term benefit if Turkey recognized the Armenian genocide?
well, it's not exactly the topic of the conference, but if somebody wants to answer.
That's a great question.
Of course, yeah. You have an answer to?
No, sure.
Why not give it a try? Well, it would be immensely beneficial for Turkish society, as Riga has also expressed, quite apart from what it would mean to the Armenians. It would not have legal consequences because genocide is a crime perpetrated by individuals, not by states, not by nations. All the work of the criminal court, of the Yugoslavia tribunal, the Rwanda tribunal, all of that shows that the only ones that can be convicted for genocide are individual persons, perpetrators, and they're all dead in this case. So I would say that part, recognition of the genocide, would not in itself immediately carry a legal penalty or whatever. It would be very beneficial, but it won't happen in the short run. The short run, in my view, would mean still, at least 5 to 10 years, and that would be an optimistic estimate, I suppose. So I am convinced that it will come in the future, because you cannot undo the things that have been. The door has been opened. There is ever more discussion of the issue in Turkey. I think that process will continue, and I think that the greatest hope there is particularly the Kurdish part of the population, especially in the southeast, where the opening up, where the Armenian genocide is concerned, has gone a lot further than in the country at large. So I think hopeful signs, not just among intellectuals in Istanbul, also among the Kurdish opinion leaders, let's put it that way, in the southeast, are moving, but a recognition of the genocide is a long way away yet, I would say.
Yektan and Ryan, because Yektan wanted to add something. Ryan,
What Eric said, I think, I'm sure many of the people in the room have been following sort of events over the last month leading up to April 24th and reaction of the Turkish government regarding this. And I think one of the more prescient things said I've read recently is by our friend and colleague Ayhan Aktağ, who has said that the question is not the government's acceptance, it's society's. And at this stage, less than 10% of the population would accept and even the concept of a genocide, let alone responsibility. And I think, to draw an analogy here, the U.S. government has never accepted committing genocide anywhere, at any point, towards anybody. Now, but on the other hand, it's very clear that the discussion of genocide in academic circles and social circles throughout the United States is very much hitched to the democratization of the country in the last 50 years plus. And that's what has been the driver. And in some ways, it's not about the academic issue in and unto itself. It's actually about broader, the broader embrace, the broader involvement of society in trying to tell its own story. I think so long as that that responsibility is directed at the state, you'll get nowhere, because the state will. Ultimately, you will get something akin to what happened last year, which is an apology that bad things happened, and societally. So I think the change really should be societal, and to echo what Eric just said, we're a long way from that.
Okay, I mean, I actually already told part of it, but first of all, I think we should realize that denial is not an exception, that's the rule. So it's not that genocides are usually recognized that Turkish state is denying it. That's why denial is part of the process. Another thing I think we should realize that, genocides do not simply destruct or burn or they're very creative events as well. So the Armenian genocide helped create a state, perhaps not one state, more than one state actually. We can talk about two states, and it helped create a nation, a kind of nationalism. So that, and I share your Professor Zucker, I share your pessimism about the short term. If you look at the situation in Turkey today, becoming more authoritarian, more etatist, how can you recognize something if you are becoming more etatist? How can you recognize something which is the base of creation of, it's at the base of your state. So I think I'm totally, unfortunately pessimistic about it.
Miguel, I think
Well,
a final word and then.
Final word, well, on an optimistic note, it is important, nevertheless, that the Kurdish party leader, Selahattin Demirtas, acknowledged the genocide. He said, yes, it happened, we're sorry, and hopefully they will get more than 10% of the vote, which is like the threshold. And once they do that, that could definitely change, at least in the political arena. The interesting thing is, who should be the one apologizing, and what should they be saying? That's another thing to think about. I wrote a piece on basically Erdogan's apology, saying that it is not an apology, because for it to be an apology, you have to bring yourself into it, and you have to say, I understand, this is sorry. When you hear that, Erdogan will never, ever in the world bring himself into apology. That is not Islamic in nature. And we don't even mean Turks. He doesn't even apologize to Turkish violence. Violence against the Turks, Armenians, for him, it's only the Muslims, that are very interesting. From that point of view, I want to go only with the civil society, as I have recommended. I'm a part of Project 2015. I'm flying to Istanbul. I'll be there on the 24th of April. We'll be trying to take up things. And then we'll see where that takes us. There has to be, I am not willing or ready or even know how to change minds of states, but I can talk to the people. So we can start from the ground up. That's the only thing we can do, is push basically the state and the government. That will happen 5 to 10 years. We'll have another conference that one for organizing this one.